with my microphone. Are you there?
Yes, we are. We can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
We're just going to get started in a couple minutes, guys.
Cool beans. And Alyssa, can I go ahead and share the content when we get ready to start?
Yes, you can. I'll unshare my screen now so you can do yours.
Thanks.
Amy, I'm just doing a trial with my microphone. Are you there?
Yes.
Yes, we are. We can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
We're just going to get started in a couple minutes, guys.
Cool. Sounds good. And Alyssa, can I go ahead and share the content when we get ready to start?
Yes, you can. I'll unshare my screen now. Sorry, guys, there's an echo with the live stream, so you just heard the same conversation twice. Sorry about that.
Problem.
All right, are we ready? Do we have everyone here? Amy, you ready to get started?
I'm sorry, you're frozen on my screen. Am I frozen for others, or can you guys?
Oh, wait, hold on one sec.
Coming through.
There we go. Sorry. You ready to get started, Amy?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, guys, I'm really excited for this next event. This is like one of the ones I've been most looking forward to this entire time, mostly because I've heard so much about these incredible people for so long and never actually gotten to hear from them myself. Today, we are joined by some incredible panelists from Eunice Sports Hub and the International Olympic Committee Young Leaders to talk about sport and the fight for the future. So we have Amy, who's facilitating today, and then we have Rachel, Valerie, and Waleed, who are joining us as our panelists. I'm not going to talk too much about them because I want them to take the opportunity and introduce themselves. And yeah, let's go ahead and get right on it. We are live on YouTube and on Facebook as well. So we have people not only tuning in here, but people tuning in outside. And I'll be sure if we have any questions coming from YouTube or social media to throw them your way as we go along.
Excellent. So nice to meet you guys. Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Dahman, as Alyssa said, and I work with the Eunice Sports Hub on supporting in the IOC Young Leaders Program. And I'm really delighted to be able to be here today to let more of the people around the world who are interested learn about how sport can be involved in the fight for the future and some of the people who are leading such initiatives. So I'll go ahead and maybe you guys can just say hi, each of you, but Rachel May from Scotland, who has a social business and sport initiative called More Outdoor. Rachel, I don't know if you want to go ahead and say hi so everyone can see you.
Hi, everyone. Very nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation and look forward to speaking sport.
Yeah. And then we have Val de Falbert from Mauritius Island, who founded an initiative called Precious Plastic Mauritius. And Val, I don't want you to go ahead and say hi to everyone.
Yeah, hello everyone. Looking forward to share about my project with you.
Cool. And then finally, Waleed Abunada from Jordan, who has started an initiative called the Champ Camp.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Alyssa. Looking forward for this conversation.
Thank you. And I am going to go ahead and open up a little deck here. And there we go. I think it'll be easier this way. Oh, it's not loading. That's okay. Well, we have the presentation prepared to share with you guys after, just in case it won't load. I'm not able to share the content. But in any case, what's more important is hearing from Val and Waleed and Rachel. So we just wanted to share a little bit first before we get into the discussion about sport and the fight for the future. about how the IOC Young Leaders Program works, what it does, who's involved in it. So it is an initiative led by the International Olympic Committee and Panasonic to empower incredible young people around the world who believe in the power of sport to make a difference, to create grassroots solutions locally that can help people in their communities with various different social challenges, all of them using sport as a tool. So whether it's empowering and including refugee members of the community, whether it's doing climate action, environmental advocacy, whether it is including people with physical developmental disabilities, sport is a really powerful tool, and these young people prove that. So the IOC and Panasonic, to make it more viable and accessible to young people to really have the full potential to unleash their ideas and their solutions in their communities, provide support with grant funding, mentorship, monthly educational content to really get the young people who are leading these initiatives to make a long-term impact on their communities. UNIS comes in as social business advocates. So we are founded by Nobel Peace Laureate Professor Muhammad Yunus, who is also the father of modern social business. And we really believe at Unisports Hub that sport and social business together can really make a sustained difference in societies. So we believe sport has the power to change the world, and social business is a model that can sustain that power. And these three young people on the call here, who are experts and you have so much to learn from, are all developing social business models to sustain their sports-based solutions in their communities. So without taking too much time, I just want to jump in and say that we're going to do a little dialogue Q&A. And these are questions that were posed to us from Unite 2030 that would be interesting to participants to hear. But there's going to be time for open-ended Q&A at the end. So you guys can come in and ask questions to our lead, Rachel, Val, myself at the end. So for the next 30 to 40 minutes or so, we'll just focus on Q&A between us, and then we'll open up for group Q&A. So yeah, and with that, like, as we talk now about sport and the fight for the future of sport's role in helping solve social challenges, we're going to kind of dive into case study examples from them based on their experiences. So first off, for people who have this nuanced idea, like, okay, sport for solving social problems. Tell me more about this. Where do you get the motivation for this? Rachel, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your experience, how you identified a social challenge, and how it helped you to see that you could really use sport as a tool for innovating a solution locally. And I know it involves local experience abroad, and also tapping into what your passion is, what your sport is.
Sure. So thanks very much. In a way, maybe it's a bit controversial, but I probably came across sport before I came across its full potential. And I first came across its potential whilst I was living in Tunisia for a few months, and I started volunteering for a football project. And that's where I came to learn how many barriers sport can break down. So in that context, I was seeing it break down barriers between girls and boys, between rich and poor, between people of different physical or mental abilities. And I then came to work for an organization called the Homeless World Cup. And at the Homeless World Cup, we were organizing a global football tournament every year for teams from all over the world, some of the most socially disadvantaged, isolated, and excluded people in the entire world. And I really came to learn about how global and how pandemic, if I may use that word in another context, inequality is around the world, but also back home here in the UK. And so I live in Scotland. And those who are most socially or economically excluded are also those who are most at risk of poor physical and mental health. So I wanted to explore what I could do myself. And although I had had experience with football for quite a few years, football is not my sport. And my sport is hiking. I like the mountains. I like being outdoors. I also like skiing in the mountains. I also like open water swimming. So anything that gets me outside in the fresh air. And in Scotland, the air is very fresh. I can definitely say that. So I started volunteering with a couple of different organizations and I realized that the hiking that I found so empowering for myself growing up could actually be transferred, and I could share that with other people who'd perhaps never had the opportunity. And there are so many communities in Scotland who've never had the chance to leave their own part of the city, let alone the city itself. So I started organizing some hikes into the nearby mountains, which we're very lucky to have, outside of Edinburgh and Glasgow, which are the most populated parts of Scotland. And sport was an obvious choice for me because I was passionate about it anyway. Also, it's a universal language. And for me, fighting inequality means giving equal opportunity. And for me, giving equal opportunity also entails sport. So the fact that everyone should have access to sporting facilities and opportunities, and that should not be something that is limited and is a sort of luxury activity. So More Outdoor, my project, it will break down psychological and social barriers to create empowering hiking experiences for people who've perhaps never left the city. It'll create a sense of belonging, a sense of physical achievement, but also teach outdoor skills. And I want it, of course, to be sustainable in the sense of empowering people, but also financially sustainable. So there's a business model that goes with it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I appreciate that you have this kind of diverse experience of sport being the thing that motivated you, like helped you to identify the challenge in the first place, right? Like it was working with the Homeless World Cup and identifying like, oh, you know, even though I'm abroad and I'm seeing this social challenge, I'm very, very much more aware of social challenges that exist in my backyard. I think it's really powerful. And I know, Val, for you too, you are really cognizant as, and you'll tell us a little bit more about Mauritius, like what is going on in your community and challenges that are really pervasive, that there's not a solution towards. And you've developed 3 different projects now through the IOC Young Leaders Program, all of which have been sustainable. And your most recent initiative has really been about protecting the beautiful beaches of Mauritius. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about, yeah, that motivation and how your background with sport and sport itself plays a role in your solution.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. So I'm from Mauritius Island, and living on a small island, I'm very concerned about plastic pollution. So we know that plastic pollution always ends up in our ocean, and this is a really big issue on Mauritius. But I'm also an IOC Young Leader. I was also a high-level athlete, and I was thinking, how can I contribute to this social challenge using sport? A lot of the time I went to do beach cleanups with my sport clubs, but all the plastic we collected on the beaches, we always ended up throwing it back into our landfill, and our landfill on Mauritius are already full. Actually, we have a big lack of recycling facilities. So I did a lot of research, and I found Precious Plastic, which is a social business based in the Netherlands. And Precious Plastic give us all the resources for free and available online to build our own recycling machine. So I decided to build 2 plastic recycling machines. One is a shredder, so it will shred the plastic into little pellets. And the other one is an injection machine. So it inject the plastic that we melt into molds. And of course, I decided to do sport equipments. So we are now recycling plastic that we collect from the beach into sports equipment. But we are also using sport to create awareness about social plastic. So we use the sports equipment during activities and awareness campaigns around the island. And we really try to create lifelong behavioral changes with people during those activities.
That phrase right there is so beautiful. Lifelong behavioral changes with your activities. And
I love that phrase too.
I know, and it like fits so perfectly with what like Waleed's mission, his If you guys know Walid or haven't had the chance to know him, you should, but he is really adamant about this like small but quality lifelong change in the people he works with. So Walid, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the Champ Camp and how you make that happen, that lifelong change.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. So my experience with sport was quite similar to, I think, all of us attending this talk here today, is that sports, I was involved in sports my whole life, ever since a very young age. I think I tried every single sport there is that was available to me here in Jordan. But my main focus or main sports were football and Olympic weightlifting growing up. And I later even tried sports as a writer, as a coach for juniors, and just I had different experiences with sports. And the common theme across was that sports kept me off bad directions or bad roads, let's say. And it definitely gave me a bigger purpose because anything I was doing in life was related to sports in one way or another. So for me, the most radical change happened when I went to study university abroad. I studied in Spain, and I was in a small town in the north of Madrid, and it did not have any Olympic weightlifting facilities or access to Olympic weightlifting. So I had to found the club myself. And I started the Olympic weightlifting club with a couple of students. It was a large success. It had great impact. And I always say this, it had great impact on students who were privileged to study abroad, privileged to practice sports, and generally did not have the toughest of lives. And the other aspect of where sports comes in is my identity. I'm originally Palestinian myself, and I've always wanted to do something for Palestinians living in refugee camps. And I do realize that in any other world, I could have been born in a refugee camp myself. So the natural thing for me was to run back to the camps and not away from the camps. And for me, sports was the tool where I could access the heart of those camps. And that's when I founded the Champ Camp in 2017. So Al Baqa refugee camp is the largest Palestinian refugee camp in Jordan. It's an area that's troubled with unemployment. It has its own large rates of poverty, just general difficulties of having a normal life at a very young age. So for me, I found sports as a medium for that. And I think the organizations that are already existing or being based in Al Baqa refugee camp are tackling needs that are more physiological and more related to safety and just general health, which is excellent, don't get me wrong, but not a lot of people are tackling the loophole, which is purpose. And I think this is where the Champ Camp comes in, using sport for purpose. Because here in Jordan, we have a term that's called waithood, which is a phase that is between finishing education and transitioning into adulthood. So that is often due to high unemployment rates and just general difficult socioeconomic conditions. And I think purpose is something we're all lacking, is that we're all lacking a general feeling of ambition or purpose or somewhere to look at. And I just want to finish off this by quoting Nietzsche when he said that he who has a why can almost bear any how. And seeing our kids at the Champ Camp, you can tell how they've already been facing anyhow at such a young age. They've been at the age of 11, most of them were already making income for their families. So seeing that potential and power that they have, and then seeing that they're already doing that without a purpose, for me, that's where sport can become a phenomenal tool, by giving them a purpose and in order to just create larger influence.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that purpose component is huge. And I think for each of us, for IOCM leaders, anybody who's attending this call, likely it's like understanding like our role as human beings in this wider goal of helping people to live better lives, as being a purpose. But to achieve that goal, right? Like, we come up with these ideas. I'm sure like people attending this Unite 2030 event this past weekend, in whatever other context you're involved in, whether you're an IOCN leader listening to this or from any other young leader initiative, there's often these ideas that come up, right? And they can be brilliant, and other people can be really excited about them too, but going from idea to implementation is really a challenge often. So you guys have done a great job of not just believing in your idea and working, but even like taking advantage of resources, finding resources to make that happen. So just as other people here might be toying with their own ideas, whether they be related to sport or not, how have you guys leveraged different tools or tactics? What has really worked for you in coming up with your solution and making it a reality? And I think Val, you and I have talked before about social media and this, right? It's not for everybody. Totally. The platforms, it can be a really big challenge, but has been something that's been super effective for you. So maybe you can speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, sure. Fortunately, Mauritians are very concerned about recycling. And as I told you, we didn't have the means to do recycling. So as soon as I shared about my project of wanting to build machine to recycle plastic on social media, I had a lot of interest and a lot of, I found all my human resource that I needed for the project. I found some engineers, I found some people that were good in marketing. So very quickly we could do a nice little team. So that really helped to use social media to share about my project beforehand to find the human resource I needed. But also one of the tactic, or maybe more what I've learned through the past, it's starting with a very small project. So I think that it's always good to start small. And I really wanted to keep it small at the beginning, starting with a little pilot project, only 2 recycling machines, only being able to recycle 15 kilos of plastic per day. And then slowly we can grow. And I think really starting small is the key to achieve sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big Professor Yunus quote, is and
I love
advice he
Professor
gives
Yunus.
yeah, I think we all do. But he gives that as advice to whenever he goes and gives talks at universities, you know, people ask, where do I start? And it's not even just where so much as how is small. And I think you guys have all done that in different ways. Waleed, maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience with starting small, with your initiative in Jordan and the Champ Camp, and how starting small has helped you to adhere to your values a bit too. Or not even a bit, but totally adhere to your values.
Yeah, I think starting small, like Val highlighted, is really essential, because you need to remember, I was talking about how sports was giving them a why, but you need to remember the why of the individual who is doing the project, whether that's me or whether that's anyone who's embarking on their own journey doing this, and the why of the organization itself. So at the Champ Camp, our vision is building champion people, which, as I always say, it's being a champion is not only about medals, but it's about being a champion as an individual, at home, with your family, with your friends, at school, just in different environments overall, to really find what the champion really is. And the model itself is sports-based youth development, and we're working with a very concentrated group. So it's been the same 40 kids across the past 3 years now. And we did not like, for the specific reason that we did not work with other kids than those 40 kids at the core of our activities, is that we want Al Baqa refugee camp to be lifted to the better. And that can only be done through working, according to our philosophy, that can only be done by working with a very small concentrated group, in the hope that all of them will become champion people, or at least one of them. And many temptations come across the way. So you get temptations to scale up. I personally had different proposals to scale the Champ Camp across different areas in Jordan and even in the region. And I feel if we did that, we'd be drifting away from the values and the mission that we have. Because right now we have a clear focus, a clear scope. And although numbers, and this is where the word impact comes in, and I always find the word impact troubling because you have so many different definitions of it. But on paper, if I say that I'm working with 50,000 kids in the region, the natural assumption is that I'm leaving more impact than what I'm doing with 40 kids. But I tend to disagree with this notion, which is sadly something that I think we all should drift away from, because we really need to focus on long-term events. And this relates back to a experience I had at a younger age where I failed to sustain a project. And for me, that left a drastic impact on me, because we should always think about the long-term development rather than the short-term temptations. And also remember your why, because at the end of the day, staying small is staying true to your core. And just to end it with the key success, I think, behind establishing a model that is grassroots, is that you should stick to the concept of the power of proximity. And what I mean by that is that we often, when we want to start an initiative, regardless of whether it's a sports initiative or another project or a business or a startup, we always look at resources, toolkits, networks, videos, documentaries, papers, but we often fail to ask the beneficiaries themselves, what do they want? So if the Champ Camp really wants to create change in Al-Baqa and transform the entire community, it would absolutely be pointless if we do it without consulting the community on what it needs and what solutions does it seek. And I think that's something we did very successful at an early stage, is that we gained the trust of the community. And that's where it should all kick in, is at the moment when you defeat that trust barrier is the moment where you can start growing from within, and only then succeed in building independent people who will continue their lives. It's a ripple effect, as we always say.
Yeah, so engaging beneficiaries' input is so important to any development that's really like actually understanding and empathizing truly. I think, Rachel, we've talked a little bit about that, is like how we even identify a beneficiary group, and how do we determine like what a need is. And you've really like kind of, through your experience with your peer networks who've helped you, I think you can speak a little bit to this as a resource, like, you know, your School for Social Entrepreneurs in Scotland, the IOC Young Leaders Program, how those have helped you to kind of come to terms with who you're working with, who you're not working with, and how you navigate that space, but ultimately like leaving the decision up to the people, right? Yeah.
Definitely. So I'm very much in the startup stage. I feel, especially when we hear these like exceptional stories and impact stories from Walid and Val, but so I'm very much in the startup stage. And what I've realized is that first of all, I very much like working with other people. But I'm doing it by myself, aren't I? So these networks like the IOC Young Leader Network, or I'm also in this program of schools, social entrepreneurs in Scotland, and the partnerships I've been trying to create, they become so important. And I really like people, some people hate it, but I really like people inputting in the ideas. And if it sparks off a train of thought or sparks off ideas in their head, that's really positive feedback for me anyway. And then I can take and leave what's useful. And I think that taking and leaving is a really critical process, of course, that you're not being dragged off in different directions. But I'm very open to ideas and to sort of challenging, to people challenging me with questions and, well, how does that work? And what does that mean? And so on. So I think that process and those conversations are so important during the development phase. And what I'm still learning is something that Val and Walid have covered, is this idea of starting small. So that's definitely something I'm kind of battling with, because I feel like I need to lay all the foundations and everything needs to be ready and everything needs to be perfect. But a colleague who's doing her own social business once said, done is better than perfect. And I've realized that's so important. So done is better than perfect. So getting done, getting something on the ground, actually just doing what it is you set out to do, and then develop it from there. And whether that's having conversations with the beneficiaries, or whether that's maybe speaking to the people you delivered with, the volunteers or whatever, and debriefing, and how did that go, and what did that look like, and how can we do it better next time? That's when you can perfect it. There's no way of perfecting it before you've tried it. And so there's a lot I'm still learning, but there's also, I've realized there's a lot that I've learned. And as you said also about the target group, that was a thought process and a struggle I had right at the beginning, even just applying for funding or applying to be parts of these networks, to be a part of these networks, is who am I targeting with this? And so I forced into a box, to put people into a box, to sort of say that there's a specific label or a specific category or a specific social group that I wanted to work with. And that's not really where my motivation came from. So I had to really sort of stand by the fact that I want to create opportunities for everyone. And of course, I can't work with everyone, but it doesn't mean that that's not part of my sort of ethos or principle. So it's about creating empowering and accessible experiences, and that can break down inequalities, and it can also promote physical and mental health and well-being. And the way I've sort of resolved that as well is to work with organizations and social service providers who are already embedded in the communities and who already have groups, and they're ones then in a position to tell me whether their groups or clients can benefit from walking up a mountain in the rain in Scotland. But if not, it can be a learning process. And it's about working, for me, it's definitely about working together and meeting up the day before perhaps and saying, this is what it's going to be like, and this is what I need you to pack, and this is what we're going to do together, and adjusting it as well, adjusting those trips according to the needs and interests of who's going, so that it is a positive experience.
Yeah. I really like that. What you're talking about is the learning process, right? And the learning process, I had a teacher once who said, the definition of fail is first attempt in learning, you know? And so I think inherent in our development processes is like, you know, we talk about this in like startup business loops, right? Is build, measure, learn, this iteration process. And inherent in that is failing, right? Is seeing things that don't work. And then how do you build something and that does work? And, you know, we're met with these challenges, like, you know, we have these ideas in mind, like, oh, this is the thing, right? This is the solution. And then when it's on the ground and we're like, okay, nobody in this beneficiary group wants to walk up the mountain in the rain, you know, like what now? And so I think you guys have all done a really good job of, whether it's in this project or in previous projects, and I shouldn't even call them projects, these are your startups, your work, is taking the challenges, taking the quote unquote failures, right? And relabeling them and then adapting. And I think you've all kind of addressed these like challenges that you've talked about as you've talked about tactics and tools that work for you and how you've needed to use them, but also just in the midst of COVID-19, that is the challenge, right? Like this is for all of you. For Waleed, the youth that you're working with cannot meet and physically lift in the gym, right? They can't go to competitions internationally, which gives them a lot of opportunity. They can't meet with their coaches and mentors one-to-one. Val, you've addressed some of the challenges that COVID-19 has brought towards behavior and panic mode, and how that has left, you know, recycling practices totally as kind of a back thought or an afterthought for people on your island. And Rachel, I know you've talked about the exacerbation of inequality that comes with this. So maybe, I don't know, Val, if you want to speak to that first piece about the challenge here and how you're adapting.
Well, it's true that COVID-19 is affecting, is driving away the good habits that we had in terms of recycling, because now actually everything is wrapped into clean film for safety measures and everyone is more concerned about their health than the environment. But that being said, we can see also that COVID-19 has a positive impact on environment. When people are asked to stay home, the big industries are under lockdown, the carbon emissions are going down, the oceans are getting cleaner, the air is getting cleaner. On Mauritius Island, we can even see that some sea turtles are coming back to the beach because the beach are actually closed. So I'm actually really taking the advantage of those examples that we can share, showing that actually as human, we are a bit messing up our beautiful planet, and keeping this momentum going on and sharing about my project and how I can contribute to recycling and plastic pollution. So I'm really using right now the social media and this momentum to continue and raise awareness about environment and sport.
Nice, that's really good. And I think even like you've talked about using social media as like an awareness raising tool for your initiative, but also with this, I think it's a really great way for people who are listening to this call right now to think about, you know, any initiative that you've wanted to start, get off the ground, whether it be a social business model or something else, another grassroots initiative. You know, all hope is not lost. Your hands aren't tied. You can still do something really meaningful. Sport can still play a role in helping, especially in the midst of COVID-19, and what you guys are doing is helping to define that with your work. It's really wonderful. And Waleed, I know that you have the digital component, which a lot of people have as an advantage, is not necessarily an advantage for you right now, but you are adapting. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you and your colleagues at the Champ Camp are really still committed to still working with the young people in the camp.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. So Just to readdress your point, which is super critical, I think you hit the sweet spot with stating that it's an experimental process, and like and I think Rachel said a really nice quote that I liked is, I think what's done is better than
done is better than perfect.
What's done is better than perfect. And this is really crucial to understand, especially if you're starting an organization and starting a project, because essentially it's an error-ridden process. You're gonna be facing multiple barriers. Like, the only thing that is not guaranteed is that it will just be a linear growth or a linear evolution from there. So I think it's important to note that, and that is why it's really crucial to create a dynamic model that can cope and adapt to different changes. So when I started the Champ Camp, like we always talk about it, Amy, is that I started the Champ Camp as an initiative, just purely focusing on sports. It was aiming to provide a safe space to young boys and girls to practice the sport that I love, which is Olympic weightlifting. And they were already practicing Olympic weightlifting in the area in general, but nothing that was kind of like a systematic approach. And that was my sole mission at the time. Then I saw the impact it had in terms of just emotional levels, in terms of personality growth, character development. And that's when the Champ Camp kind of broadened its focus, broadened its programs more than broadening its focus, because by broadening our programs, we actually narrowed down our focus into building champion individuals, because now we have athletic programs, now we have social programs, educational programs. And I think this model that's a kind of like flexible also allows many people who have ideas to come and approach us and offer their ideas. And that has already happened multiple times, because individuals have come up to us and told us about their ideas, and now they're fully functioning programs. And in relation to the challenge of digitalizing Olympic weightlifting, that's obviously something that hasn't been done yet. But COVID has been a really interesting challenge, because our boys and girls are now confined in their homes. And again, you need to keep context in mind. They're not confined in a home that is large. They're not confined. They do not have their own bedrooms. They do not have a garden, a balcony, a pool. It's often a house that is the size of the two average bedrooms, with the family members being up to 6, 7, more or less. So it's a very confined area. But like I told you, our kids naturally face challenges on an everyday basis, and I think the work we did strengthened that. And we managed to distribute training equipment right before Jordan set down a curfew or like a full-on lockdown here. So that was nice, because now we started a new series, which is on our social media channels. It's called Home Champions, #Home Champions, on the Champ Camp accounts. And we're just showing how our young boys and girls are continuing to practice sports on a everyday basis, even with the lockdown, even with the circumstances. Again, back to failures, we tried to start a book club in order to kind of encourage or promote Palestinian literature and culture. And the book club was actually aiming to engage our kids into reading and developing their mental ability and continuously engaging their minds. But most of our kids were simply not interested in reading. And we actually ended up having more people sign up for the book club from abroad, from the US and Europe. And the beneficiaries that we focused on did not actually enjoy the process. So my point is, you need to constantly experiment with ideas, with programs. You need to be flexible. You can't have a very rigid structure. And the more flexible your structure is, and the more rigid your mission is, the more likely you're going to end up managing regardless of the circumstances.
Yeah, I like that, the flexibility and lack of like adherence to this kind of rigidity, my way or the highway. It's like, I think you were touching on it too, Rachel, it's just like the ability to let go. And I don't know if you want to speak to that with what you're working on right now, and how you're adapting to, and we've talked about this before in IOC Young Leaders Group, like I think it's something that everybody working in this space, sport for development space, I mean, even in practitioners, like, are our hands tied? And I think everybody on this call right now is really like, no, they're not, that we can do so much. It's just a matter of innovating, and even if it means back end stuff, even if it means like using this time to develop. I think that's something we've talked about.
Yeah, no, so the stage I was at, it was about getting kickstarted. So actually this week I was meant to be doing my final mountain leader assessment qualification, and that's been pushed to September. So a few delays there. But so all sorts of things have of course been on hold. And the thing we're not allowed to do is be in groups outside. So as far as Morador goes and the activities that we'd planned, nothing is happening. I've been spending my time trying to get all those things on the back burner going, building a website, setting up, having communication, really thinking things through, thinking about the business model to keep us sustainable in the future, making project proposals and plans, and really sort of coming to terms with my own ideas and trying to sort of tidy up some of my own thoughts. Apart from that, though, I think I've also spent a lot of time thinking about what the pandemic, COVID-19, what lockdown means for people and what it means for society. And I think what's clear is that inequality has become even more transparent. It's very clear who has a big house and a big garden and space, and who's got a job situation that will see them through this, and what living situations are at home, and what parents have the capacity to keep the education going at home, or whatever. There's all these inequalities and all these differences are really coming to the fore. And it's also, again, something that's hitting every nation around the world. And of course, the lockdown situation, thoughts are always very much with people who are living at home alone, or who have perhaps lack of internet and can't stay as connected, or who perhaps don't have family and friends around them because they're living elsewhere, or perhaps for circumstances that they couldn't help, if that's persecution or fleeing a situation at home. But on the other hand, something that I am seeing here anyway, is that people are desperate to be outside and people are desperate to be active. And here we have you're allowed to leave the house once a day to do your daily exercise, and the only other thing you're allowed to leave the house for is to go to the shops once a day, and everyone's doing it. Like I know people who never did exercise before are doing their daily exercise, and so there's this real sort of change and value for our freedoms and for what we have, and also for the space around us. So exploring locally, and even myself, if it's going for a local run or something, what can I do, and what can I explore, and what can I discover from my front door. So it's really interesting seeing that, and some of, even in so in Scotland we're still in lockdown, in England it's opened up, but people are heading straight for the hills, and it's really strange. And that's like, those places are normally remote, empty and untouched, so that'll be interesting to see how that sort of develops. And of course it is a really big opportunity for me to maybe help facilitate that and support that. And also especially for those people who are extra isolated and who perhaps still face a lot of psychological barriers or confidence issues, or don't have the right equipment, or don't have the means of transport to getting to those places. So it's to sort of to step in and try and remove some of those barriers. And in general, I think More Outdoor, my project, will be in a really good space. So I guess where I'm at, I kind of feel jealous when people already have their groups and they have their contacts and they know they're already sort of in motion. But where I'm at is about what can I do when this does end? Because it will change, the situation changing, but it doesn't mean we're going to be going back to normal anytime soon. But there will be a chance where we can be outside and that we can be meeting in groups again. And it's about being there in that moment to help with that transition back. And so I'm exploring that from the sort of social side of it, but also on the business side. So helping corporates, for example, with their employees who have perhaps been living in isolation for a few weeks, and getting them back together and reconnecting. And maybe even a physical walk back to the office together. So just like creating that sense of community again, and make sure that people don't keep a 2-meter distance from each other forever, which some people in Scotland might like.
Yeah, but I think you've hit on something that is so important, is like understanding where you meet to facilitate the transition too. Like, even as we think about, people on this call might be thinking too, like, how will we know when this transition will happen? Everything is so ambiguous. But even just like taking small steps now to innovate, to connect with other people about what that can look like. And I think, as you said, you feel jealous of people who have their connections and whatever. You have, a whole group of people who are here listening. Who knows what might come to fruition from that? There's this a lot of people who, I think one thing we're learning with Unisports Hub too, we just started a community sports response, which is, in the 2 weeks that we've opened it, and we were thinking small at the beginning, over 100 people have come in and said, like, I want to use sport to help in some way, but defining that, it can be really challenging, especially when like this idea of coming together physically to meet is tough. But innovating ways, whether it's digitally, like Waleed's participating in this too, like how mentorship, and that's so huge, like the isolation component. Sport can still be a means of helping people in isolation, helping mentally and physically, but to be able to connect through sport digitally is possible. And that's something that we can take advantage of. And then using this time like you're doing, Rachel, like you're thinking, just to think more about, like really to take this space and time to think about what is my role here? What is my role in my city's transition, my country's transition? How can I be a meaningful facilitator there and sustain it? Like you're saying, because you're thinking about it from the social side and the business side. And I think that like that's the constant balance that we have to be thinking about, is how we sustain anything that we're trying to do. And Val, I know your context in Mauritius, you're still working on things, but there's been a lot of pauses and holds because of confinement. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about, I think you touched on it a bit earlier, but what you're doing right now with social media and videos, but also how you see Precious Plastic Mauritius moving forward in this kind of unknown, and how the sports equipment that you're creating could play a role in that.
Yeah, well, it's true that unfortunately the project was put on hold because we also were going to start a collection system with the inhabitants. We were supposed to help give employment to people in need, and they were supposed to also like use a bicycle to go and collect the plastic in each household. But all that have been put on hold. But we are still using this time and the time we have now at home to create a nice little videos, awareness, continue this education that we started on the field, but now it's online. And we are also already having online meetups with the volunteers. Hopefully on the 1st of June, the lockdown will be finished in Mauritius and we can start again our activities and have the impact we want, start to have the impact we want.
Yeah, and keeping, like, I think that this whole world will, everything that we put on the ground again will have new like cautions to bear. And so I love that you're bringing up cycling as a solution, something that in the Youth Sports Hub Sports Response and other areas too, a lot of cities around the world are opening up roadways just for bicyclists. And because you can maintain social distancing, it's good for the environment, and it's also a way to get out of the house and kind of combat some of the negative repercussions that isolation has brought for mental and physical health. So, you know, using bicycles as a way to still safely go about collecting plastic, bringing it back, and keeping some of those parameters in place is really, it's really cool that you're leveraging the bicycle in this too. I often think that the bicycle has an underestimated power to save the world, but that's a
well, it's fair. You've never seen someone unhappy on a bicycle.
Yeah, unless you're with a 5-year-old who's like falling over, but you know, that's the learning process, right? We're all about the learning process. So I would love to just open the floor to the participants on the call for questions for these brilliant people. You should connect with them online, but I have an email that we'll share with videos as well, and photos of their projects, so you can kind of visually get a sense of what they're working on, and also contact information so you can stay connected with them. And so yeah, let's just open up the floor for people in the audience who would like to ask any questions about sport, about its connection with social business, about its role in the future, and solving problems facing society. So, yeah.
I think we have a question on the chat now.
All right. Thank you so much, Elena. Is that question directed to, so it's directed to everyone. how did you enhance your commitment for your mission? And yeah, thanks for the helpful presentation. So advancing your commitment to your mission. Walid, I know you have thoughts on this one, so maybe you could go ahead and take a stab at it really quick, and then Val and Rachel, you can chime in.
Yeah, I think something that's related to commitment and also related to the challenge of COVID and where we can come in as people from the sports industry is that sport is not just about physical fitness, but there's a large element of mental fitness and emotional fitness that comes into it. And this is where athletes, I think, have an edge. Those who have committed to sports or have entered the sports world in general, is that you can't enter sports if you're not a committed person. At least if we're talking about more, if you're not doing it just for fun. But if you're doing sports on a competitive level, you tend to have a commitment, you tend to have a large volume of discipline being put into your work as an athlete. So you tend to replicate that with your approach to everything else in life. And I think when you enter this field, especially if you're not dealing here with a very monetary process or a very transactional process, but you're dealing with individuals who are developing. And that on itself, the moment you enter this arena, it's really hard to withdraw from it, because you realize that you have some sort of bond or connection to these individuals, that you feel you owe them something that is giving you the strength to continue, because you need to know that like I said, it's an error-ridden process, and that a setback should not really take you off your path, because you have people not only counting on you, but counting on each other to rise up. So the moment you realize that you have individuals in this process, there's a human element into it, it's really hard to not commit to it. You're going to have tough days. You're going to have, like we were talking earlier in this call, the imposter syndrome, like Rachel mentioned, into thinking like, are you really qualified? Are you worth being in the position that you are today? But as long as, I keep going back to this, as long as you remember your why, as long as you remember what you're trying to achieve, it's hard not to commit, especially when you're seeing results.
Yeah, definitely. And
maybe on that, just I had that thought often. It's like, I'm not the right person to do this, and what am I doing? And there's other people that are more qualified. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the fact no one else is doing it. So you've got to do it, otherwise it doesn't happen. And that helps with the commitment side. I also think I had difficulties being like, what's my story, or why am I the one doing this? And some people had real sort of transformational stories that I was always very inspired by. And I felt like I didn't have my story. But then I also came to terms with the fact that actually this is about other people's stories. It's about creating a new story. It's about deciding what's not right and how you want to change that, and or at least do your bit to change that story. And those conversations, those individual conversations that you remember, and that one line that someone says and you remember it and you say it multiple times to someone else again, or you keep repeating it. Those little conversations, those individual conversations that you have are the things that keep you invested and keep you feeling responsible, and you've set some expectations and you've almost made a promise to yourself, and maybe also vocally. That kind of helps. If you commit yourself to something in a very sort of physical, practical way, it helps then you find your focus again when there's times where there's other distractions or other priorities take over. That kind of keeps you in the long run on track, I guess.
Yeah, totally. I think, Val, it's interesting to hear from you on this too, because you have a really good example of, you have various passions, we all do, and commitment and an ability to solve challenges in a really efficient way. And so how you manage, addressing one challenge and then identifying a group who can take up what you have built, continue with it, and then you trust them to continuing with that solution, like your project Aging Well with the Mauritius Sports Council. And now, like, you feel comfortable, like that is taken care of. And so you can now address what you're like, this is another really pressing social challenge. That one, I've done it for 3 years. It's still something that's a mission that's so close to my heart. And I have a group of people who are ready, who I've worked with, who know how to keep it going, and I can focus on a new mission too. So like that balance too, like staying committed to a mission and also knowing like what the value you bring as a problem solver. And so knowing the time to transition too.
Yeah, well, it's true that I'm passionate. I care about a lot of different social challenges, but I think it's important when you start a project. I think when you start it, it's because you really care about this social challenge and you are really passionate about the means you are going to um, put forward to deal with this social challenge. And a lot of the time you will see that when you lead a project and you start a project, actually some people outside will try to pull it in another direction. You will have sponsors, you will have maybe big companies that want to give you money, but also to have your project change a bit where you wanted it to go. And it's very important for a long-term commitment to stick to the why you started, as Walid say, and really what was close to your heart and why did you started to do it.
Makes sense. Did we get other questions that came in too? Laura Maria. Yeah, you got a question, Walid. Aside from the obvious effect it has on the kids in the camp, have you been able to see positive impacts of your work outside of your immediate reach? For example, examples of how kids who train with you are themselves becoming change makers or positive influencers on their immediate surroundings.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice question, because that's pretty much the work that we're trying to do, is that we're trying to create change makers. And I always say this, is that our kids, if we're talking about social entrepreneurs, if we're talking about problem solvers or change makers, our kids are naturally change makers, because what is a change maker about? It's someone who's solving problems. And they're born into this tough world where they're constantly exposed to challenges and they have to overcome these challenges just because they're always on that survival mode. So for us, what we try to do is take that brilliance that they already have, that knowledge, and try and cater it into something that they can replicate positively into the community. And we've been seeing that. I'd like to give maybe one case study. We've been seeing it in different phases, but especially when it comes to challenges about what it means to be a girl doing Olympic weightlifting. Because Olympic weightlifting is viewed as a boys' sport only, even in the most liberal of societies. It's stigmatized as a sport that only boys do. So let alone when we go to a very conservative area like Al-Baqa refugee camp, where it's still a challenge for girls to enter sports to begin with. So we went with the extreme, we went with Olympic weightlifting. And that was a major challenge because our girls face a lot of stigmas. And now I'll be relating this to how we witness change makers, is that our girls face stigmas by one, first of all, they're refugees. Two, they're Palestinian refugees. Three, they're female Palestinian refugees. Four, it keeps going. Then it's young girls who are Palestinian female refugees who wear the hijab and are doing sports. So it's just these constant stigmas around them and these constant challenges that they face, whether they're on a cultural level or societal level. But the first direct impact of seeing them becoming change makers is that despite all of these challenges, we gave birth to the largest women's team to ever exist in the Middle East. And it's from the refugee camp, all of them. And one of our girls, Sara is a very strong advocate of girls' participation in sports. Sara is very committed. She had potential to become a world star. Sara started from having never left Al-Baqa refugee camp to competing in Jordan, Bahrain, and Egypt, winning medals all across. And for me, that's a direct influence. But Sara recently faced an illness that was quite serious and forced her to stop continuing Olympic weightlifting. She was 15 at the time, so she's dealing with this at a very young age. And it was a very serious, severe illness. But this illness did not result in Sara just giving up on life. And this illness was the least of her concerns, given the different challenges that she's already facing. But she did not give up on life there. And now Sara's coaching the young boys and girls of the champ camp who are under the age of 10. So it's really nice to see this cycle develop, is that she noticed that sport gave her such a huge platform on her. And I'm only highlighting her work through the example of Sara because she, just like others, noticed the influence of sports and how it gave her an escape, a platform to grow, and did not stop when she stopped having that experience, but decided to continue sharing that experience with the younger generations. And seeing that she hit that realization at such a young age is something really beautiful to see. And I really hope that we continue seeing them when they all develop their characters completely.
It's really exciting to hear the exact stories. There's a question from Christelle. Hey guys, did you get any kind of support from people for your projects? Because one cannot always do everything alone. That's a great question, Christelle.
I can go for answering it first. Definitely. So prime example is our IOC Young Leader Program. So having that network and having colleagues when actually you're working by yourself in your country can be quite a lonely experience. But for me, being part of something global and international, it really sort of helps with that motivation as well. So there's that sort of support of networks. But then also there's the financial support that we get from the IOC Young Leader Program. And I've also been fortunate to receive other funding for the More Outdoor initiative. Apart from that, it's also those connections with businesses. There's a lot of interest in Scotland, for example, for social enterprise. And I've had corporates, like financial investment companies who are going to help me with pilot programs. And that really helps me understand and predict the future and make sort of educated and informed decisions on how this is going to develop, and have very open, raw conversations that you wouldn't otherwise have if it was a paying client, for example, and to help with the business side of this project, which will help its future. So yeah, none of it happens by myself. And I think even just speaking to friends and talking things through and being challenged, I think I mentioned earlier, that's a really critical process for me, because I'm not good at taking the time to think things through otherwise. I kind of fill my head with other stuff. I like whatever, I'll start baking, or I'll start drawing, or I'll start running. I'll just do whatever it is that I need to do to sort of fill my head, rather than sitting there thinking by myself. So those conversations and working with other people is a really important process.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, we have a question from Rohith. Hey friends, how has funding and support changed in the last couple of months? How do you all see it changing?
I mean, this is an interesting question, because especially because considering we're talking about the context of social business here as well. So funding for the Champ Camp was not directly affected with COVID yet, but there's a big possibility of the yet. So we still don't know what's yet to come. And I think this is where social business can come in. And this is where I think everyone who is entering this type of work to try and come up with a model that is flexible, and I repeat, and I emphasize on the importance of the flexibility of the model, is to ensure that you have a model that's flexible enough that it could monetize through some stream or through some process in order to continue sustaining itself. And this is a process that we're undertaking at the Champ Camp, and it's part of actually the groups that we're doing with the community response for Yunus Sports Hub. So the group from the Middle East connected, and I'm being connected with an incredible group, mainly from Lebanon. And soon enough, repeating the theme from network and importance of having people support you, is that I think if you're struggling with the issue of funding, and if I see that the funding will change, not necessarily drastically for such young projects, but it will change. And you should utilize your network in order to try and think of ways where you can monetize through the service that you're doing, where you can generate enough money to self-sustain the project and not rely on external funds. And that's when you can simply have a conversation with, even if they're random people, tell them about the work you do, tell them about the model that you have, and ask them for suggestions on how they think you should make money. I think a simple conversation can go a long way with that.
Absolutely.
So I'm just really saying that the model of social business, I think, especially in such emerging times, is the way to go.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, Professor Yunus, and I'm going to wrap it up because I'm cognizant that we have a next session starting. But, you know, in times of crisis and disaster, is charity needed? Absolutely. And then in the rebuilding process, this is where social business is essential. And Professor Yunus has proven it time and again over the past 30 plus years. Almost 40 years, starting with the Grameen Bank, is that the world's first microcredit institution, which is now all over the world, literally pulling millions of people out of poverty. That began in a time of crisis. That was developed in response to a mass famine that was happening in Bangladesh in the 1970s. So thinking about, you know, if we don't have reliance on traditional forms of funding, what can we do as entrepreneurs to innovate? And I'll leave with that bit of inspiration is every single person is a born entrepreneur because you're born creative. And to be an entrepreneur means creating solutions. So I want to encourage everyone with that because I find it to be really true. And not necessarily that it's easy. I think Rachel and Val and Walid have all emphasized that it's not easy, but there are solutions that you can develop, and there's networks. I know Unite 2030 is a network, Unisports Hub is a network, IOC Young Leaders is a network that are full of people here to support. So Alyssa, I'm going to hand it to you. And I also just want to say thank you so much to people who came in. Thank you, Val. Thank you, Walid. Thank you, Rachel. You are an inspiration to me, to I'm sure several people who are here. And it's really encouraging to know that people like you are out there doing what you're doing, and really blessed to have you as community members. So yeah.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists, Walid, Val, Rachel, and to Amy for facilitating this really great discussion. Really appreciate you guys for joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you back for some more things too. And I'm really looking forward to seeing, you know, the progress in your work as we go along. And I really appreciate you guys for joining us today. With that, we're going to transition straight into our next conversation. I would invite you all to stay, or you're more than welcome to move into the other Zoom room, which we're doing a conversation on the global goals and sustainable tourism. In this room, we're moving on. We have Jalen Boone joining us. He is the UN Youth Observer to the United Nations, and he's joining us in partnership with UNA USA. And so I'll let him introduce himself, tell a little bit more about him. I'll just hand it over to you, Jay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alyssa. Sorry, I look like I'm inside of like a prison cell or something. Like it's like honestly so hard to find quiet spaces in my home. But thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today. Just a little bit about myself. I am here in Katy, Texas, but I'm originally from Ypsilanti, Michigan, where I was born and raised.